The northeast of Scotland is a large triangle of land that extends out into the North Sea. It's a rugged, twisted coastline. An ancient landscape that has been fashioned by geology. In the spring of every year, hundreds of thousands of seabirds will come ashore here to breed. It's a time to renew relationships and strengthen bonds. Space is at a premium, and nest sites are fiercely defended. Some are still trying to tempt a partner. Others are having little success. The chicks are now very vulnerable to predators and the weather. Once their chicks are old enough and strong enough to fledge, most of the adults will leave to spend many more months at sea and not see land again until next year. Out at sea, another great migration is also taking place. The Atlantic salmon is heading home to the rivers of its birth. Its journey starts here in the feeding grounds of the Arctic waters off Greenland. That's where salmon from many places around the world will come to feed and grow. Some return home after 1 year, while others may stay for up to 4. For some, home means North America. Others head for rivers in the Mediterranean, Northern Europe, and the Baltic. Wherever they're heading, by the time they approach the coast, they've stopped feeding. Most will never feed again. There's only one goal now: to return to the river of their birth and to breed. It's going to be a very dangerous journey. Dolphins. Bottlenose dolphins. These are some of the most northerly dolphins in the world, and they're big. Some are over 3 meters long. This is their patch, and they're here for the salmon run. They hunt in packs, trying to drive the fish into shallow water where they're easier to catch. Mothers and their young calves all join in. Sometimes it seems as if the salmon are not just food, but part of a game. Some are hard to swallow. It's the salmon's sense of smell that guides it not only to the river of its birth, but to the very stretch where it hatched from its egg. Estuaries are dangerous places, so they need to time their run into the mouth of the river at high tide so that they can make it as far upstream as possible. The sand dunes here are always on the move. For hundreds of years, they've changed their shape. They're held together by grass and gorse. The estuary is home to a huge variety of plants, birds and animals. Eider ducks breed here in their hundreds. The food supply is all controlled by one powerful force: the moon. Twice a day, 365 days a year, the tide ebbs and flows, providing a huge source of fresh food. The rich, organic mudflats offer an abundant supply for fish and wading birds. At low tide, shrimps, worms, crabs and mussels feed a large number of predators. The incoming tide then replenishes the food supply for the microscopic organisms that they depend on. But the predators waiting for the salmon are much larger. Common and grey seals gather in their hundreds along the sandbanks of the estuary. If the river levels upstream are too low, the advancing salmon are forced to turn back on the ebbing tide and return to the sea. There they face the waiting seals again. For some, the journey ends here, as a large seal lunch. After which, well, for the seals, it's time for an afternoon nap. In order to stay off the seals' menu, salmon need to move quickly through the estuary. The river, whose pull has brought them over hundreds of miles of ocean, is hardly a sanctuary. As their kidneys and vital organs adjust from salt to fresh water, they no longer feed or drink. All they have now is the energy stored in their body. Once through the estuary, they've made it into the main stem of the river. Now they have to contend with another large predator. The salmon is one of the greatest sport fish of all. It's highly prized. For the angler, it's a challenge to land the fly in the right spot. No one really knows why the salmon take the fly, as they no longer feed. Some think it's pure instinct. But it's hooked, and the struggle begins. Some get away. Others fight on until exhausted by the battle. For some, this could be the end. But this one is lucky. All salmon on this river have to be released. There's no death sentence. Its journey can continue. As the long summer days stretch out, the salmon will lie up in deep pools throughout the season, conserving their energy. They still have a long way to go. It's autumn on the river. Summer has faded. A dipper works this section. There's a plentiful food supply. Just as the leaves turn brown and red, so the male salmon change from silver to the same bright breeding colours. The males also develop a hooked beak called a kype. Flushed with hormones and rested from the summer lie-up, they're ready to move upstream. It's been a very dry summer. Water levels are low, and the fish can't get very far upriver. Heavy rains make the water level rise. When the spate starts to decline and the water clears, the salmon continue their journey. But there's a problem. Up ahead, the river's much narrower as it flows through a rocky gorge. The rains have raised it to a dangerous level. But the salmon can't wait. They sense the end of their perilous journey is close. They have no choice. They must go on. Using the standing wave of the waterfall as a springboard, they attempt to leap up through the rushing water. But its force is too strong. Time and again, they're thrown back down. For some, it's a bruising experience. Battered and exhausted, they're forced to rest between attempts, then try again. The urge to breed is too compelling to resist. Salmon have been seen leaping up falls over 3.5 meters high. It may take many attempts before they finally make it, but it's what they were born to do. They've made it. This incredible journey started near the Arctic Circle nearly a year ago, and finished here nearly 3,000 miles later. The spawning grounds in the Highlands of Scotland. There's no time to waste. They're close to exhaustion. Using her powerful tail, the female digs a nest called a redd. As she does so, she also leaks small quantities of ovarian fluid into the water. These pheromones attract male fish. It's a signal that she's ready to lay her eggs. Two younger males are eager to breed with her. One of them vibrates his body next to the female in an attempt to get her to lay her eggs. But she'd prefer her eggs to be fertilized by a larger, stronger male. So she nips at this upstart to discourage him. This much larger male is a better proposition. He's been attracted by her scent. He's nearly 1 meter long and has an impressive kype. All qualities which the female finds much more alluring. He drives the young males away to keep the female for himself. It could be his last chance to mate. For her part, she continues to dig the redd, constantly testing its depth by dipping her anal fin into it. With the other males chased away, the mature male sidles up to the female. They both vibrate their bodies as the female releases her eggs and the male fertilizes them with his sperm. But it's not just the mature males that fertilize eggs. This juvenile salmon is called a parr. He sneaks in and also releases his milk. In some cases, the sexually mature parr managed to fertilize some of the eggs. He's known as the precocious parr. Salmon eggs are sticky, so they adhere to each other and to the gravel in the bottom of the redd. The female then shovels gravel from upstream to backfill and cover the redd. This creates another redd. For safety, she'll repeat this process, laying packets of eggs until she has no more. With the eggs now fertilized and safe, her task is complete. The purpose of their long, hard journey has been fulfilled. The mating is over. An otter comes driving through, scattering the salmon, but it seems he's not interested in the big meals right in front of him. He continues his journey downstream. The fish haven't fed for nearly a year, and they're exhausted. This female and many of the males are showing signs of a fungus infection. If a salmon loses more than 40% of its body weight, the chances of it surviving are slim. Some, mostly females, can make it back to the sea and feed again. But most males die after spawning. Poor conditioning and the stress of fighting other males for the right to breed has taken its toll. Unlike their Pacific cousins, some Atlantic salmon make it back to sea to feed and return again. A female that's made it back to spawn 3 times will have swum more than 18,000 miles in her lifetime, surviving many predators along the way. In her spawnings, she'll have laid around 20,000 eggs. She truly is a remarkable mother. It's quite possible that some of these magnificent creatures may die within meters of the very spot where they themselves hatched. But nature's life cycle continues. And as the bodies of the dead fish decompose, they add nutrients to the water. The quality of life in the river is improved, as is that of their young waiting buried in the riverbed. Winter's grip begins to take hold on the river. As the temperatures fall to below 0, ice forms. But the female has chosen her spot well. Her precious eggs are safe, deep in the redd. The water flowing through is well oxygenated, keeping the eggs healthy and free from parasites. Huge storms have hit the coast. They've coincided with unusually high spring tides and have caused terrible floods. bringing misery to thousands of people and devastating many hundreds of homes. For the salmon, it's a disaster too. The floodwater is thick with silt washed off the land. Many redds will have been washed away. Others will have been covered with silt, starving the eggs of the oxygen they need to survive. For many salmon, the journey will have been in vain. Eventually, the signs of new life start appearing everywhere, and spring begins its yearly renewal. There's life in the red. Incredibly, some have survived the flood. Triggered by the rise in the water temperature, the still buried baby salmon are getting restless. As one moves inside its egg case, the others around it react, stimulated into their own struggle to escape. They're beginning to hatch. These young salmon, just 10 millimeters long, are known as alevins. They burrow down into the gravel bed and huddle together. Kept alive by feeding from their yolk sac. Almost all of them will survive this stage of their growth. Over time, they begin to colour up, develop tail and fin features, and show signs of their transition into the next stage. The alevins have now become fry. They're about 20 millimeters long. They've left the gravel and must find shelter amongst the rocks and stones on the river bed. They're beginning to look like salmon, but they're still very vulnerable. Most will fall prey to birds and other fish. And if food is in short supply, many will starve. After about a year, they're known as parr. The vertical markings on them are called parr marks. They're a form of camouflage. Their diet has changed too. Now they feed on aquatic insects. They're highly territorial and won't tolerate others who come into their field of view. They prefer to live in areas with larger stones. The stones hide their neighbours. As parr, they remain in the river between 2 and 4 years. When they get to about 12 centimeters, they're known as smolts. The parr marks begin to fade, and their organs are beginning to change to allow them to process salt water when they go to sea. This is also the time when the scent of the river is imprinted in their memory for the return journey. They're ready to go to sea. Lying up during the day to avoid predators, the smolts feed in the evening light. They've spent most of their lives fighting to stay apart, but when the outward journey starts, the smolts gather and travel downstream together, moving mostly in the evening and at night, back to the main stem of the river and on to the estuary. The predators are still there. The smolts must find their way past them out through the estuary to the open sea. They're less than 20 centimeters long, and for the first time they're swimming in salt water. They need to move quickly north, way up to the feeding grounds. The salmon is one of the most scientifically researched fish in the world. These anaesthetized salmon are being tagged before being released back into the river. Here, young salmon and trout parr are being stunned by an electric current. An anesthetic stops them from getting stressed when they're handled. Their numbers and size are recorded before they're released back into the burn. This is a rotary trap. As the smolts swim downriver towards the sea, some of them are caught. Again, their size and numbers are recorded before they're released. We know a lot about their life in the river, and we're learning more about their life at sea. In Scotland, salmon numbers have declined on many rivers. They've already disappeared altogether from some Mediterranean rivers, but the threats to them have multiplied and they're in serious trouble. Of the thousands of smolts who make it to the sea, 95% will perish. In the past, over many years, thousands of the salmon and sea trout which survived have been caught and killed annually on their return by coastal mixed stock fishing nets. These nets catch the fish before they enter their natal rivers to breed. Huge conservation efforts are being made to improve their chances of survival. If we permanently remove the coastal nets and allow the salmon to make it to their home rivers, and if, in those rivers, anglers release their catch, more salmon will make it upstream to breed. The life cycle of the Atlantic salmon, hatching from its egg to live buried in the gravel, growing into a parr, surviving 4 years in the river, then entering the sea as a smolt, and returning years later to its home river. It's one of the true wonders of nature. It's also what's known as an indicator species, which means that the strengths and weaknesses of its population help us to measure the health of the wider environment. And it's now in serious trouble. We can help to save it. Images such as this leave no doubt that the Atlantic salmon truly is the king and queen of fish.